When he whispered, "God works in mysterious ways," I smelled his foul breath on my face. For 3 years I was the sacrifice my own father offered to the altar. In the end, it was my hand that sent the devil back to hell. Good day, my dear viewers. What a joy to chat with you today. My name is Eleanor Bradford. I'm 72 years old and I live here in Millfield, a small town in rural Kentucky. A warm little place with its flower-lined streets and open-hearted people. I was born in a tiny fishing village in Maine, but life brought me here many years ago, and this is where I made my home. These days, my greatest pleasure is walking through the town streets. Every single day around 5 in the afternoon, when the sun isn't so strong anymore, I put on my old sneakers and go out, thinking about life, observing people, houses, and changes. It's my moment of reflection, to converse with my thoughts and make peace with my past. I started this routine after I returned to normal life. It was my way of finding myself again, of feeling that there was still a world beyond walls, beyond bars, beyond the confinement I lived through. Each step I take on Millfield sidewalks is a celebration of my freedom, of my strength to have survived. Sometimes I stop at Memorial Park, sit on a bench, and watch children playing, mothers watching over them, birds singing. I think about how life is a cycle, how we all have our secret struggles, our hidden pains. And I'm happy to see that despite everything, life continues, love persists, hope is reborn. I'm recording this video here on my porch with the church bell in the background. If you listen closely, you can hear it. Ironic, isn't it? How today that sound brings me peace when once it brought me so much terror. But that's a story for later. Before I continue, I'd like to ask a small favor. If you're enjoying listening to me, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps this old grandma continue telling her stories, and tell me in the comments which town are you watching from, and at what time of day did you find this video. Early morning with coffee, after lunch, or already in the evening. I always read all the comments and I'm so happy to know where you're from, and when you take a little time out of your day to listen to this old grandma's stories. Let me know. Okay, let's create a chain of kindness. Today, I'm going to tell a story I've kept for many years. A story about faith, about power, and about how sometimes salvation comes in the most unexpected ways. I wasn't always this peaceful lady who walks the streets contemplating life. There was a time when every step I took was out of pure fear. I was born in a small fishing village in Maine in 1953 in a simple house by the Atlantic. Our town was an isolated place where boats were more important than roads and time seemed to move slower than the waves of the great ocean. We were a family known by everyone in town. My father, August Bradford, worked as a carpenter specializing in boat construction. But what really consumed his days was religious devotion. Mama Linda sold homemade pies at the local market. Those blueberry and apple pastries that only New England hands know how to make just right. I had 2 siblings, Walter, 4 years older, and Ivy, 3 years younger than me. Our house was simple wooden, raised slightly to protect from the occasional flooding. The walls had saints hung all over, my father's doing, who believed that the more sacred images we had, the more protection we'd receive. In the backyard, we had a big maple tree that was my refuge when things got difficult. I'd climb up there and watch the ocean, dreaming of the day I might get to know the world that existed beyond those waters. Life in a small Maine fishing village in the 50s and 60s wasn't easy, especially for simple families like ours. The town survived on fishing, small farming, and coastal trade. The traditions were strong. 4th of July celebrations, harvest festival, church socials, and the Baptist church was the heart of it all. Even more so in such a remote region where the pastor's word was almost law. My father was the type of man who would remove his hat and cross himself every time he passed in front of the church. He woke up at dawn every day to pray before going to the shipyard and forced us to accompany him to Sunday service. No exceptions. God is watching everything. Girl was what he always told me when I questioned something. And I believed it. How could I not? It was all I'd heard since I was old enough to understand. My childhood was divided between the public school, playing by the shore with other children, and the household chores that Mama taught us from an early age. I liked jumping in the water, making paper boats, and telling stories to the rag dolls that Mama made for me. Jenny, my favorite doll, stayed with me for years and years. She was my confidant, the only one who knew my fears, my dreams, my childhood anxieties. I remember well the smell of fresh fish that Papa would bring from the sea, the aroma of apple pies that Mama baked, and the sound of the saw and hammer as Papa worked on the boats. I also remember the Sunday processions when the whole town would get dressed up, and people would wear their best clothes to follow the pastor down the narrow streets. It was precisely during one of these church events that everything started to change. I was 11 years old when a new minister arrived at our church. Reverend Jerome Albright came transferred from Boston, preceded by a reputation as a holy and miraculous man. Tall, imposing, with a deep voice, he seemed to have the power to hypnotize the faithful with his sermons about soul salvation and the dangers of sin. My father was completely fascinated. "This is a true man of God," he would say, his eyes shining. Soon we were participating in all church activities. Papa became one of the main supporters of the parish, donating his time, his carpentry work, and what little money we had. "It's an investment in heaven," he justified to Mama when she complained about our increasingly empty table. I noticed something strange in the way Reverend Jerome looked at the children, especially the girls. There was a gleam in his eyes that gave me a chill in my stomach. But who was I to question? A simple 11-year-old girl in a town where a minister's word was law. Besides, everyone admired him so much. It must have been in my head, a child's imagination, as my mother said. On my 12th birthday, I received an unexpected gift. Reverend Jerome appeared at our house for dinner. It was such a great honor that Mama prepared a whole fresh caught cod, the biggest Papa had fished that week. During the meal, he didn't take his eyes off me. He praised my dedication in Sunday school, my voice in the children's choir, and said I had a special gift for serving God. Before leaving, he spoke privately with my father on the porch. I could tell from the gestures that the conversation was serious. Papa nodded, seeming to agree with everything. When the Reverend left, I noticed a change in my father's expression. He seemed both worried and strangely satisfied, like someone who had just closed an important deal. That night I couldn't sleep. There was an uneasiness in my chest, a bad feeling that wouldn't let me rest. I hugged my Jenny doll tightly and cried, not really understanding why. It was as if something inside me knew what was coming. As if my childish soul could sense that from that day on, my life would never be the same again. The next morning, while helping Mama wash the dishes, I heard Papa announce proudly, "Eleanor has been chosen by Reverend Jerome to help at the parsonage. It's a blessing from God for our family." Mama dropped a plate which shattered on the floor. The sound of breaking china was the sound of my childhood shattering forever. That's how at 12 years old, my life took a dark turn. 3 times a week after school, I had to go to the parsonage. A sacred commitment, as my father said, adjusting my clothes and pushing me out the door. As I walked through the center of town toward the church, I felt like I was walking to the slaughterhouse. Each step was heavier than the last, and my heart was beating so hard it seemed to want to escape from my chest. The parsonage was behind the church, a white wooden building with a wide porch and green windows. To the faithful passing by, it must have seemed like a place of holiness. To me, it was the entrance to purgatory. At first, the tasks were simple. Sweeping the floor, washing dishes, arranging books on the shelf. Reverend Jerome would sit in his armchair, watching as I worked. "You're a very special girl, Eleanor," he would say. "God chose you for a greater purpose." His words made me uncomfortable, but I smiled timidly and continued my work. At home, things began to change. Suddenly, there was more food on the table. Papa showed up with new fabrics for Mama to make our clothes. Walter got school supplies we could never afford before. And most surprisingly, my father was invited to build a new boat for the church, a job that would be very well paid. "See how God rewards the faithful," my father would say during dinner with a strange gleam in his eye. "That's why we have to be grateful to Reverend Jerome and do everything he asks." Mama stayed quiet, eyes downcast. Sometimes when Papa wasn't looking, she would look at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Was it fear, guilt, helplessness? I never knew for sure. What I did know was that she too was afraid of my father and his explosive temper when contradicted. After a month working at the parsonage, things got worse. Reverend Jerome began asking me to stay after hours for special tasks. The first time was when he asked me to help organize his collection of prayer cards. We were alone in his office with the door closed. "Come closer, child," he said, indicating the space next to him in the chair. The smell of incense and cologne made me nauseous. "Let's pray together to thank God for bringing you to me." He took my hand and placed it on the Bible. His hands were cold and damp, like the skin of a dead fish. While he prayed, his fingers began to caress my wrist, moving up my arm. I was paralyzed, not understanding what was happening, but feeling that something was very wrong. "This is a sacred secret between us and God," he whispered when he finished the prayer. "If you tell anyone, you'll be betraying God and condemning your family to hell." I returned home that day with a feeling of filth that no bath could wash away. I didn't tell anyone. How could I? My father believed the Reverend was almost a saint. My mother, though suspicious, was trapped in her own silence, and I, a 12-year-old girl raised to obey and respect elders, especially men of God, had no words to describe what was happening. The following weeks were a growing nightmare. Each visit to the parsonage brought a new boundary crossed, a new unwanted touch, a new violation disguised as a special blessing. Reverend Jerome said he was purifying me, preparing me to serve God in a special way, that I was chosen, that it was all an honor. I started to disintegrate inside. At school, my grades fell. I stopped playing with the other children. I couldn't sleep properly anymore. I had terrible nightmares where I was drowning while everyone on the shore just watched, including my parents. I began to isolate myself, to speak less and less. "What's happening to you, girl?" my mother asked one night while helping me wash my hair. "You look like a ghost walking around." I wanted to tell her, my God, how I wanted to tell her. The words were there on the tip of my tongue. But then I remembered the Reverend's threats, the hell that awaited traitors, and especially my father's happiness with the new opportunities we were receiving. "Nothing, Mom. Just tired from school," I replied, swallowing my tears along with the truth. There was one afternoon, however, that marked the moment when something inside me began to change. It was a day of heavy rain, the kind that falls relentlessly in the Northeast. I was at the parsonage helping to dry the floor that had gotten wet because of a leak. Reverend Jerome was more agitated than usual. He had been drinking wine during lunch. "Eleanor," he called from his bedroom, "I need your help here." I entered the room trembling, already knowing what awaited me. But that day was worse, much worse. He was different, more aggressive, demanding things that I didn't even properly understand. When I tried to refuse, he grabbed my arm forcefully. "You think you can say no to me?" he whispered angrily. "I am the voice of God in this town. Your father gave you to me as an offering. You are mine now, understand?" Those words, "your father gave you to me as an offering," were like lightning that struck me. It wasn't just the Reverend. My own father knew. He knew and had allowed it. He had sold me for favors and money. Something broke inside me at that moment. It wasn't just my innocence or my faith. It was my resignation. The fear continued, but now there was something else along with it. A small and silent anger, but as strong as the ocean current, began to grow. "My mother is waiting for me," I managed to say between sobs. "She'll get suspicious if I'm late." He released me with a push. "Go, but come back tomorrow. And remember, if you tell anyone, it won't just be you who suffers. I have people in town who would do anything for me. Anything. Think about your dear mother and your little sister." I ran out into the rain, not caring about getting soaked. The water washed away my tears, but not my shame. I ran until I couldn't anymore, until I reached the shore where no one could see me. I screamed at the turbulent waters, a scream that no one heard, but that marked the moment when I decided that somehow this had to end. That night, hidden under my bed, I began to write in an old notebook. I noted everything: dates, times, what happened, what he said, what he forced me to do. I wrote about the gifts my father received in exchange. I wrote about the threats. It was my only testimony, my only proof. I hid the notebook in a hole I made in the floorboards under my bed. The next day, my father announced the big news. Thanks to Reverend Jerome's intervention, he had secured a contract to build 3 large boats for a wealthy merchant from Boston. It would be the biggest job of his life, the one that would finally lift our family out of poverty. "And all this thanks to your dedication at the parsonage," he said, running his hand through my hair with a pride that made me nauseous. "Keep it up, daughter. You're being a blessing to this family." That's when I fully understood. I had been sold. My body, my childhood, my dignity, all exchanged for boats and money. My own father had closed this diabolical deal and was happy about it. I looked at my mother, seeking some sign that she understood what was happening, but she just looked away, pretending to be busy with the food. Her silence was the final betrayal. The following months were an endless nightmare. What started as 3 visits a week soon turned into 5. Reverend Jerome had convinced my father that I needed intensive spiritual formation. To the rest of the town, I was the blessed girl receiving direct instruction from the pastor. "What an honor," the ladies would say after the service, patting me on the back. If only they knew. Each day my soul shrank a little more. At home, I became a ghost, present in body, absent in spirit. I stopped smiling. I stopped singing. I even stopped crying because tears no longer relieved anything. My only consolation was that old notebook where I continued to record everything, writing by candlelight after everyone was asleep. The abuse steadily worsened. Reverend Jerome was no longer content with moments at the parsonage. He began calling for me at night, sending the sexton to knock on our door with some urgent pretext. The Reverend needs Eleanor's help to organize the baptism materials for tomorrow. The Reverend needs Eleanor to help prepare the candles for the prayer meeting. And off I would go, dragged by my father's firm hand, who never questioned these nighttime calls. One night I tried to resist. "I'm feeling sick, Father," I lied, clinging to the sheets on my bed. "I think I ate something bad." The answer came in the form of a slap that stung my face for hours. "You never refuse a call from a man of God," he shouted. "Get up right now or you'll regret it." My mother watched everything from the bedroom door, eyes lowered, hands trembling. She knew, I'm sure she knew. But the fear she had of my father, coupled with blind respect for the church, kept her silent. A silence that screamed in my ears. The worst, however, was the isolation. Gradually, the Reverend began to control who I could talk to. First, it was my friends from school. "Worldly girls who can lead you astray from the holy path," he said. Then even my own siblings. "You need to focus on your religious studies." Finally, even contact with my mother became limited. A true servant of God must learn to detach from earthly bonds. By the time I turned 14, I was living in a world apart. I went to school but couldn't talk to anyone. I returned home but couldn't participate in family conversations, and I spent more and more time in the church and parsonage under the yoke of that man who used God's name to satisfy his most sordid desires. The money kept coming to my family. My father prospered with his boat-building contracts. Now, not just in our town, but in neighboring towns as well. Our house gained a second floor, new furniture, even a refrigerator, a rare luxury at that time and place. My brother Walter was sent to study in Boston at a good school. My sister Ivy got new dresses and dreamed of having her own sewing machine. All this at the cost of my stolen childhood, my destroyed innocence. One morning, I woke up nauseated. I ran outside the house and vomited behind a tree. In the following days, the nausea continued. My mother noticed but said nothing. It was old Mrs. Ellis, our neighbor who sold medicinal herbs, who confirmed what I already suspected with terror. "Child, you're expecting a baby," she said in a low voice after examining my eyes, my skin, my pulse. "How far along?" "I can't say, but it shouldn't be more than 2 months." The world collapsed. I, at just 15 years old, carried in my womb the fruit of that horror. For a moment, I thought about running to the ocean and throwing myself into the deep waters. It would be a second of courage and then eternal peace. But something held me back. Perhaps the survival instinct. Perhaps the hope that this impossible situation would finally force a change. That night, I gathered all the courage I had left and sought out Reverend Jerome alone. I found him in the sacristy organizing the vestments for the next day's service. "Reverend," I said, my voice almost disappearing. "I need to tell you something." He turned around, his face a mask of false kindness. "What is it, my child? I'm pregnant." The words fell between us like stones. I saw his face change, the mask of sanctity disintegrating to reveal something monstrous underneath. First came surprise, then anger, and finally a cold calculation that was even more frightening. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice controlled now. I nodded, unable to speak more. He remained silent for a long moment, pacing back and forth in the sacristy. Then he approached me with a smile that chilled me to the bone. "This is a gift from God," he said, his voice smooth as poisonous velvet. "A miracle, proof of the divine blessing upon our joint work." I was stunned. This wasn't the reaction I expected. I thought he would be furious, that he would threaten me, but not that he would transform it into some kind of divine event. "I'm going to tell my father," I managed to say, finding a courage I didn't know I still had. "I'm going to tell everyone what you've been doing to me." It was then that I saw his true face. The serene expression disappeared, replaced by an icy fury that distorted his features. "You really think you can threaten me?" he hissed, grabbing my arm forcefully. "I am not just a reverend, Eleanor. I am God's representative in this town. I have a circle of loyal followers who would do anything for me. Anything." He squeezed my arm harder, causing sharp pain. "If you open your mouth, not just you, but your entire family will suffer a regrettable accident. Maybe a fire in your new house during the night. Or maybe your father will have a problem with his boat in the middle of the ocean. Accidents happen all the time on the coast, don't they?" My blood froze. It wasn't an empty threat. In a small town like ours where the Reverend was practically an authority, he really had the power to harm my family. "As for the child," he continued, his voice soft again, "that can be resolved. I know people in Boston who can take care of this discreetly." I understood what he meant. The child would be eliminated along with any proof of what he had done. "Now go home and don't mention this to anyone. I'll talk to your father tomorrow and explain that you need a special spiritual retreat in Boston for a few weeks. When you return, everything will be resolved." I left the sacristy in a state of shock. The rain was falling heavily outside, but I barely felt it as I walked aimlessly through the streets of our town. I was cornered. If I told the truth, I risked my family's lives. If I stayed silent, I would lose not only the child I carried, but also the last thread of dignity I had left. In desperation, I decided to try one last thing. Tell my father. Maybe faced with the news of the pregnancy, his conscience would awaken. Maybe paternal love would speak louder than ambition and religious fanaticism. I arrived home soaked and trembling. My father was alone in the living room working on a design for a new boat. Mama and Ivy had gone to visit a sick aunt. "Father," I called, my voice barely coming out. "I need to tell you something important." He raised his eyes from the drawing spread on the table. "What is it now, girl?" "I'm busy." I took a deep breath and said, the words tumbling over each other. "I'm pregnant, Father, by Reverend Jerome. He has been forcing me to do things, bad things, since I started helping at the parsonage. Please, Father, you need to help me." The silence that followed was the most painful of my life. I saw my father's face go through a succession of emotions: surprise, confusion, and finally an expression I will never forget. Not indignation at my situation, but concern about the consequences for himself. "Have you told this to anyone else?" was his first question. That hit me like a blow. Not how did this happen or who hurt you, but who else knows? "No, just the Reverend," I replied, already feeling I had made a terrible mistake. My father stood up abruptly, knocking over the chair. "Trying to tarnish the reputation of a holy man, how dare you?" "Father, I'm not lying. Please believe me." He approached with his finger pointed at me. "Reverend Jerome told me this might happen. He said the devil might try to use you against him, that you might invent stories to try to ruin him. And I didn't believe it. My world collapsed. The Reverend had anticipated this, already preparing my father for this possibility. He already told me about the pregnancy," my father continued, surprising me. "He told me that you had confessed to him that you were secretly meeting with a boy from town. What disgrace you have brought to this family." I was speechless. The Reverend had not only predicted my confession to my father, but had already invented an alternative story to explain the pregnancy. "Father, that's not true. There is no boy." "Silence," he shouted, raising his hand as if to hit me. "Reverend Jerome told me everything. He said that despite your sin, he is willing to help us, that he will send you to a place in Boston where you can have this child away from the town's eyes, and then give it up for adoption. It's more than you deserve." I then realized the extent of my abandonment. My own father not only knew what was happening, but chose to believe the Reverend's lies instead of his own daughter. The man who should protect me was more concerned with preserving his lucrative contracts and his position in the religious community. "Tomorrow you will ask the Reverend for forgiveness for what you said about him, and then we'll arrange your trip to Boston before your shame becomes visible." That night, lying in my bed, I cried until I had no more tears. I was completely alone. Nobody would believe me against the Reverend's word. Nobody would help me. The entire town saw him as a saint. My own family had abandoned me. It was then that a certainty grew inside me along with that unwanted child. I needed to find a way out. Not just for me, but for that innocent being who didn't ask to be born this way. I would not allow my son or daughter to be resolved by people in Boston. Nor would I accept them growing up in that cycle of abuse and silence. If no one else would do justice, then it would be up to me to find a path. I took my diary and wrote at length by candlelight, not just the facts, but my feelings, my fears, my decisions. That notebook would be my testimony, my only proof against a system that protected the powerful and silenced the weak. The next morning, with swollen eyes but a determined heart, I began planning my escape from that hell. In the days that followed, I lived in a state of forced calm. On the outside, I seemed to have accepted my fate. I asked forgiveness from Reverend Jerome for the lie, as my father demanded, and pretended to be resigned to the idea of going to Boston. Inside, however, a storm was forming. While waiting for the preparations for my departure, I continued going to the parsonage. The Reverend, perhaps feeling more secure after having convinced my father of his version of events, became even more audacious and cruel. He seemed to extract pleasure from my helplessness, my forced silence. "See how useless it is to fight against me," he whispered, his wine breath on my face. "God placed me in a position of power for a purpose. Not even your family would believe you over me." With each humiliation, something hardened inside me. It wasn't just anger. It was a cold, calculated determination I never knew existed. I began to pay attention to details I had previously ignored. The Reverend's routine, where he kept his keys, when he drank, who visited him. One night, while cleaning his office, I noticed something that made me freeze. A half-open drawer with an envelope full of money, next to it a record book. Pretending to organize papers, I took a quick look. It was a detailed record of donations and favors, a sordid accounting of how Reverend Jerome bought loyalties and silence. I recognized my father's name among many others with amounts noted and precise dates. These weren't donations to the church. It was a corruption scheme disguised as charity. That same night, what happened is what I'll forever call the last straw. The Reverend had drunk more than usual during dinner. We were alone in the parsonage, as the sexton had gone to visit a sick relative. "I have news about your trip," he said, serving himself more wine. "Everything is arranged for 2 weeks from now. You'll go to a house of nuns in Boston who take care of cases like yours." I nodded silently, eyes down as I had learned to do. "As for the child," he continued with an indifference that chilled me. "Don't worry, the nuns have doctors who know how to deal with this discreetly. There won't be a child when you return." Those words hit me like a physical blow. Until then, I still nurtured the hope that maybe I could escape before reaching Boston and find a place to raise my child far from all this. But the plan had never been to send me to have the child. It was to force me to abort. No. The word escaped my lips before I could contain it. The Reverend raised his eyebrows, surprised by my sudden boldness. "What did you say?" "I won't let them kill my child," I repeated, now looking directly into his eyes. He placed the wine glass on the table forcefully, spilling some of the red liquid that looked like blood under the dim light. "You have no choice, foolish girl. You think you can decide anything. Your father has already agreed. Everything is arranged. It's my body, my child," I insisted, a desperate courage taking over me. What followed was the worst attack I had ever suffered. The Reverend came at me with a fury that transformed his face into something unrecognizable. He grabbed my hair, dragged me across the floor, shouting blasphemies I never imagined hearing from the mouth of a supposed man of God. When I tried to defend myself, he punched me in the face and the stomach. "You think this child means something?" he shouted as I curled up on the floor, protecting my belly with my hands. "It's just evidence of your sin. No one will ever believe it was me. They'll all think you slept with some from town." He kicked me in the back, making me scream in pain. "I should have guessed that a dirty little nobody like you would only bring problems. I should have chosen someone else, but now I'll make sure you never open that mouth to accuse me again." He picked up a heavy bronze crucifix from the table and raised it over my head. At that moment, I was certain I would die right there on the cold floor of the parsonage, me and my unborn child. That's when something happened. A noise at the front door made the Reverend stop. Someone was knocking insistently. "Reverend Jerome, are you there? It's urgent." It was the voice of a man I didn't recognize. The Reverend hesitated, looking from the door to me, the crucifix still raised. "Damn it," he muttered, lowering the improvised weapon. "We're not finished yet." He dragged me to a small pantry at the back of the kitchen and pushed me inside. "Stay quiet as a dead rat if you want to stay alive," he threatened before locking the door. I heard his footsteps moving away, then the sound of the front door opening, muffled voices conversing. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it seemed to be something urgent. In that dark pantry, tasting blood in my mouth with pain all over my body, I had the longest and most transformative night of my life. Crouched between bags of flour and cans of oil, I silently cried until I had no more tears. Then came a kind of clarity, as if someone had lit a light in the middle of darkness. I saw with perfect clarity what the future held. Either I would die at the hands of that man, or I would die inside in some clandestine clinic in Boston after losing my child. There was no escape within the system that imprisoned me. No one would help me, not my father, not my mother, not the authorities who saw the Reverend as a saint. It was there in that dark pantry that the frightened girl died, and another person was born, someone who would no longer wait for help or mercy. Someone who would do whatever it took to survive and protect the life she carried. I don't know how long I was locked in there. Hours perhaps. I heard the Reverend return at some point, speak to someone, then silence. I thought he would come to finish what he had started, but the pantry door remained locked. Maybe he wanted to leave me there to think about my behavior. Or maybe he was too busy with the emergency that had called him. In the middle of the night, I heard footsteps, muffled voices, the front door opening and closing. Then silence again. Exhausted, I eventually fell asleep on the cold floor. I woke up to the sound of the key turning in the lock. The door opened, revealing Reverend Jerome. He was sober now, his face a mask of false concern. "You've disappointed me greatly, he said in a calm tone that was more frightening than his shouts. "But I'm a man of God, and I know how to forgive. I'll give you one more chance." He extended his hand to help me up, as if he hadn't tried to kill me hours before. I accepted the help, not out of trust, but because I could barely stand on my own. "Go home now," he ordered. "Clean yourself up. Rest, and remember one word about what happened here yesterday, and it won't just be you who suffers." I walked home like an automaton, feeling pain in every part of my body. My face was swollen and I feared my parents would ask questions. But when I arrived, no one even noticed my condition. My father was busy with his boat designs. My mother was cooking. My sister was playing in the yard. It was as if I were invisible, or maybe they had simply chosen not to see. I went up to my room, washed the blood from my face and arms, and lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. I didn't cry anymore. The tears had dried up along with my last hopes for help. Instead, I began to plan. First, I needed money to escape. Impossible to take from home. My father counted every penny. Then I remembered the envelope in the Reverend's office. He owed me much more than money, but that would be a start. Second, I needed concrete evidence against him in case my escape didn't work out. My diary already contained many details, but that record book I saw in the office would be the definitive proof of the corruption scheme. Third, and most importantly, I needed a weapon. Not to escape. I knew I would be quickly found in any town in the region where the church's reach extended. The weapon was for something else, something that had begun to take shape in my mind during those hours in the dark pantry. In the following days, I feigned total submission. I apologized to the Reverend again, accepted the idea of the trip to Boston, showed myself repentant and resigned. With each humiliation, I smiled and lowered my head. Inside, however, each insult, each abuse, each lie fed the cold fire of my determination. I began to prepare the ground. I discovered where the sexton kept the spare key to the parsonage. I mentally mapped every corner of the Reverend's office. I observed his schedules, his routines. A week after the incident, while cleaning the sacristy, I found what I was looking for, a sharp scalpel in the first aid kit kept in a cabinet. The Reverend had once mentioned that the kit was from when he served as a chaplain in a hospital in Boston. I hid the scalpel inside my clothing and took it home, concealing it in the same place where I kept my diary under a loose floorboard. There were only 5 days left before my departure to Boston, when I had a dream so vivid it seemed more like a vision. I dreamed of my paternal grandmother, a Native American woman I barely knew, but whom my father rarely spoke of, perhaps ashamed of his origins. In the dream, she stood by the ocean, wearing traditional clothes I never saw her wear in life. She said nothing, just pointed to the water and then to me, as if indicating a path. I woke up with an absolute certainty. I couldn't wait any longer. I needed to act that very night. It was a Thursday, the day when the Reverend usually received the pastor from a neighboring parish for dinner and cards. They always drank a lot, and the meeting ended late. The sexton had permission to go to bed earlier on these days, leaving the Reverend and his guest alone. I left the house stealthily after everyone was asleep, taking only my diary and the scalpel hidden in my clothes. The night was dark, moonless, as if even the sky conspired in my favor. I arrived at the church around 1100 at night. As expected, the visiting pastor had already left. His car was no longer parked outside. The lights in the parsonage were still on, which meant the Reverend was still awake. Using the key I had observed the sexton hide under a rock near the back door, I silently entered the house. I could hear the Reverend moving in the living room, probably tidying up after the visit. My plan was simple. Enter the office, take the money and the record book, and then confront the Reverend. Not to negotiate, I knew it was too late for that, but to end everything once and for all. The office was locked, but I had anticipated this weeks earlier. I had observed where the Reverend kept the key, in a plant pot near the door. I opened the door carefully, entered and closed it behind me without making a sound. Working quickly in the dim light that came through the window, I found the envelope with money and the record book, exactly where I had seen them before. I put them inside my clothes and was about to leave when I heard footsteps approaching. The door opened abruptly, and there he was, Reverend Jerome, looking surprised and then furious to see me there. "What are you doing here, you little thief?" he vociferated, advancing toward me. I didn't back down. I didn't tremble. Something had changed inside me. Where before there was fear, now there was only a glacial calm. "I came to get what's mine," I replied, my voice firmer than it had ever been. He looked at the place where he kept the money and realized what I had done. "You're going to return that right now, and then you're going to pray for forgiveness until your knees bleed," he shouted, grabbing my arm forcefully. It was at that moment that I took the scalpel from my pocket and pointed it at him. The blade shone in the dim light. The Reverend gave a scornful laugh. "What do you think you're going to do with that? Kill me? You don't have the courage. You're just a stupid girl no one will believe." "I'm not that girl anymore," I replied, feeling a strange peace envelope me. "You destroyed that girl. What stands before you now is something else." He must have seen something in my eyes because his expression changed. The contempt gave way to a shadow of doubt, perhaps even fear. "Think carefully about what you're going to do," he said, backing up a step. "If you hurt me, you'll be hunted like an animal. You'll never have peace." "I've been living without peace for 3 years," I replied, "but that ends today." What happened next was etched in my memory with painful clarity. The Reverend tried to disarm me, advancing quickly. There was a struggle. He was stronger, but I was fighting not just for myself, but for my unborn child, for all the girls who might come after me. At some point during the struggle, the scalpel found its way to his neck. It wasn't a planned blow, but when I saw the blood gushing, I felt no remorse. I felt nothing but relief. "You will go to hell," he stammered, clutching his neck, blood running between his fingers. "If I do, you'll be there waiting for me," I replied, watching as he fell to his knees. That night in the parsonage in our small Maine town, I wasn't the lamb he expected. I was like the angel of death. He thought I was there to serve. I was there to collect the debt. Only one of us left that room alive. After that fateful night, everything happened as in a blurred dream. I remember sitting in the empty church, the record book and my diary in my lap, the still blood-stained scalpel in my hand, and waiting. I didn't try to escape. Where would I go, a 15-year-old girl pregnant with no money or connections beyond that town? Besides, a part of me wanted the truth to come out, even if I had to pay a high price for it. It was Mr. Nichols, the sexton, who found me the next morning. The poor man nearly had a heart attack when he entered the church to prepare for the service and saw me sitting on the first pew, motionless as a statue. He was even more shocked when I told him with surreal calmness, "Reverend Jerome is dead in the office. I killed him." He ran to check and returned pale, repeatedly making the sign of the cross. "My God, girl, what have you done?" "What no one else would do for me," I replied simply. Mr. Nichols, despite his shock, was the first person in years to really look at me, not with judgment, not with anger, but with a mixture of horror and could it be understanding. He noticed my face still swollen from the blows, my marked arms, the almost catatonic state I was in. "Stay here?" he said after a long moment. "I'm going to call the police." I agreed with a nod. Where else would I go? The following hours were a blur of uniforms, questions, exclamations of horror. Sheriff Irwin Foster, a serious man with a thick mustache, tried to understand what had happened. At first, as expected, no one believed my story. How could a holy man like Reverend Jerome do such atrocities? It was when I handed over my diary and the record book that things began to change. "Read," I told the sheriff, pointing to the diary. "Every date, every detail of what he did to me for 3 years, and then see the other book where he noted how much he paid my father and other men in town for their silence and favors." The sheriff reluctantly began to leaf through the documents. I saw his face change as he read from skepticism to shock, then to contained anger. "This is very serious," he finally said, closing the diary. "If it's true, it is true and there's more?" I replied, placing my hand on my belly. "I'm pregnant by him. You can verify whenever you want." And he was going to send me to Boston to get rid of the baby and the evidence. That's how, instead of being immediately thrown into a cell, I was taken to a doctor for examination. Dr. Mendenhall, coming from Boston especially for the case, confirmed not only the pregnancy, but also signs of prolonged abuse and recent marks of aggression. His report was another nail in the coffin of Reverend Jerome's reputation. Meanwhile, the record book produced its own earthquakes. The sheriff, acting with an integrity I didn't expect to find, began discreet investigations into the names listed in the book, including my father. They discovered a corruption scheme that went far beyond what I imagined. Misappropriation of donations, extortion, document forgery. My father was arrested 3 days after me. When we met at the police station, he couldn't even look me in the eyes. His shame wasn't for having sold me but for having been caught. "How could you do this to me?" were his only words, as if I were the traitor. "How could you do that to me?" I replied without tears, without anger, just an infinite sadness. It was the last time I saw him. As for me, I spent 2 months in the county jail awaiting trial. It wasn't a place for a pregnant young woman, but Nurse Wilson did what she could to ensure I had minimal care. She brought me better food than the ration for other inmates and let me get some sun in the inner courtyard every day. My daughter was also a victim of a man who claimed to be of God. She confided to me one afternoon. Except she didn't have your courage. She hanged herself before we could help. I understood then that in my misfortune, I wasn't as alone as I thought. The trial took place in Boston, where I was transferred in my 3rd month of pregnancy. It was a case that shook the entire New England region, a 15-year-old girl accusing a respected reverend of years of abuse culminating in his murder. The newspapers had a field day, though few cared about the truth behind the sensationalist headlines. Surprisingly, several people came forward to testify on my behalf. Mr. Nichols, the sex, revealed he had suspected the reverend's behaviors for years, but was afraid to speak up. Old Miss Ellis described my state of terror when I discovered the pregnancy. Other girls from town, inspired by my story, came forward with their own accounts of harassment, none as prolonged as mine but enough to establish a pattern of behavior. And then there was Harrison Perkins, a defense attorney who appeared voluntarily to represent me. "Why are you helping me?" I asked him after our first meeting. "Because justice isn't just about punishing the guilty, but also protecting the innocent," he replied with a kindness that was strange to me after so long living in fear. Mr. Perkins was a man in his 50s from Philadelphia who had a reputation for taking on difficult cases. With his always well-combed gray hair and eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances, he brought a dignity to the process that I would never have expected. It was he who convinced the judge to consider all the facts. Not just the murder, but the circumstances that led to it, the continuous abuse, the forced pregnancy, the threats to my family, the brutal aggression days before, the corruption scheme proven by the record book. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said in his final argument, "before you is not a cold-blooded killer, but a child who fought for her own life and for the life of the baby she carries. After years of being a victim of a predator who used the cloth to hide his monstrosity. If there is guilt here, it is in the hands of the adults who failed to protect her, her father who sold her, the authorities who didn't see, the community who preferred the comfort of blindness to the pain of truth." The trial lasted a week. The verdict, when it came, was a surprise even to Mr. Perkins, guilty of homicide, but with exceptional mitigating circumstances. My sentence was 5 years with the possibility of parole, after serving 203 of the sentence considering my age and the extreme situation. "It was the best we could hope for," said Mr. Perkins, shaking my hand after the verdict. "Now, let's focus on the baby and your future." I was transferred to a juvenile facility in Portland, where there were better conditions for a pregnant woman. It was there that at 7 months pregnant, I received the visit that would change the course of my life. Mr. Perkins appeared, accompanied by an elegant middle-aged woman who introduced herself as Eleanor Carpenter, his sister-in-law. "Eleanor," he said, sitting across from me in the visitor's room. "Eleanor is a university professor in Kentucky and came to meet you in person." The woman smiled at me with a kindness that disconcerted me. "My brother has told me so much about you and your story," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I came to make a proposal." And so, over tea and cookies offered by the director of the facility, who seemed impressed with my illustrious visitors, Eleanor presented me with an idea that had never crossed my mind. "Open adoption. You are very young to raise a child alone, especially in your circumstances," she explained. "My husband and I cannot have children and very much want to adopt your baby, but we don't want to separate you forever." She then detailed her proposal. They would legally adopt my son or daughter, giving them the stability, education, and love that I could not offer at that moment. But unlike traditional adoptions, I would not be erased from the child's life. I could maintain contact, receive news, visit when I was free. "And when you get out of here," continued Eleanor, "you'll have a place to stay if you want. My husband is the principal of a school in Millfield in rural Kentucky, a quiet town far from all this. You could finish your studies there, rebuild your life." I remained silent for a long time, absorbing that unexpected proposal. It was more kindness than I had received in my entire life. "Why?" I finally managed to ask. "Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me." Eleanor exchanged a look with Mr. Perkins before answering. "Because everyone deserves a second chance," she said simply, "and because life has already taken too much from you. It's time for someone to give something in return." 2 weeks later, I signed the papers agreeing to the adoption. The following month, I gave birth to a healthy girl whom I named Hope, the only name that made sense after everything. As agreed, Eleanor and her husband Claude legally adopted her, but allowed me to be present in her life, even if at a distance, during my time in the facility. I served 2 years and 8 months of my sentence with a reduction for good behavior and for completing the basic studies offered by the facility. When I was released on parole at 18, Eleanor was there to pick me up as promised. "Are you ready to see your new home?" she asked as we boarded the bus that would take us from Maine to Kentucky, a 3-day journey that seemed to symbolize my own journey of transformation. And that's how I arrived in Millfield, the town that would become my refuge and my home. Far from the suffocating humidity of New England, far from the ghosts of my past, far from a history that, though never forgotten, could finally begin to heal. Hope was almost 3 years old when we reunited in person, a beautiful little girl with dark curls and bright eyes, who ran to me as if she had always known me, thanks to the photos and stories that Eleanor and Claude had kept alive for her. "Mommy Leo!" she shouted, hugging my legs with a pure joy that made me cry for the first time in years. It was at that moment under the open sky of the Kentucky countryside that I felt that justice in its own torturous way had finally been done. Today, at 72, I live a quiet life here in Millfield. My simple little house on Maple Street is my safe haven with its airy porch, from where I can see the movement of the town and feel the wind that I've come to love so much. Anyone who sees me walking the streets at 5 in the afternoon with my white hair and calm steps would never imagine the hell I went through to get here. Millfield gave me what I needed most, a fresh start. When I arrived more than 5 decades ago, I was just a frightened 18-year-old with deep scars on my soul and an uncertain future ahead. Eleanor and Claude were more than guardians. They were the parents I never had. With infinite patience, they helped me finish my studies at the school where Claude was principal. "Education is the only thing no one can take away from you," Eleanor used to say, and I absorbed every word, every lesson, every learning opportunity as if it were water in the desert. At 20, I started working as an assistant at the town library. Books became my silent companions, offering me worlds where I could lose myself for a few hours. Stories of people who overcame seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Slowly, page by page, I rebuilt my own story. The arrangement with Hope worked better than any of us could have expected. She grew up knowing she had 2 mothers, Eleanor, who took care of her daily, and me, who was her heart mom, as she herself said. Wynne never hid her origin from her, just adapted the truth as she grew in a way she could understand. "Why don't you live with us, Mommy Leo?" she asked me one day when she was about 6. "Because sometimes love families are different," I replied. "Some have a father and mother in the same house. Others have 2 mothers or 2 fathers. And our family has you, Daddy Claude, Mommy Nora, and me, even though I live in another house." She accepted that explanation with the wonderful simplicity of children. With time, when she was old enough, we told her more details, not the horrors, but enough for her to understand that difficult circumstances had separated us and that Eleanor and Claude's love had saved us both. When Hope turned 15, the same age I was when she was conceived, I had a moment of panic. I looked at that blooming young woman, so beautiful and full of life, and was seized by terror that something similar could happen to her. Eleanor noticed my anguish. "She's not you, Eleanor," she gently told me. "Her story is not yours. Hope has a family that protects her, that listens to her, that believes in her." She was true. Hope grew up surrounded by love, security, and respect, everything that was denied to me. She graduated in psychology, inspired, she told me, by my story of overcoming. Today at 57, she runs a nonprofit that helps women and girls who are victims of abuse. I'm so proud of her that sometimes my heart seems too big for my chest. As for me, I never married. There were some men over the years, good men, who treated me with kindness and respect, but the ghosts of the past always got in the way. I discovered that the male touch, even gentle, awakened memories I preferred to keep dormant. With time, I accepted that certain types of intimacy might never be possible for me, and found peace in that acceptance. Instead, I built other forms of connection. Deep friendships like with Miss Zelda, my neighbor for 30 years, with whom I have coffee every morning, or with the Ladies' Book Club, which meets at the library on Wednesdays, or even with the young people from the public school, to whom I volunteer tutoring in English, a way to pass on the gift of education that I received. When I retired from the library at 65, I discovered the pleasure of daily walks. I started timidly just a few blocks. Soon I was walking that entire town, exploring every corner of Millfield. There's something deeply therapeutic about feeling my feet firmly on the ground, breathing the free air, knowing I can come and go as I please. A simple luxury that was once denied to me. My routine today is quiet and predictable, exactly how I like it. I wake up early, prepare my coffee. Welcome Miss Zelda for our morning chats. Sometimes I go to the library to help with organization. They say nobody knows the collection better than I do. I usually have lunch alone, although on Thursdays, Hope and her family come to visit me. Oh yes, Hope gave me 2 wonderful grandchildren, Harrison in honor of Mr. Perkins, who helped us so much, and Eliza, who inherited my eyes and her mother's strong spirit. Harrison has already made me a great-grandmother with little Aurora, who just turned 5. When I see them together, 3 generations born from my lineage, I feel that somehow I won. In the afternoon around 5, I put on my comfortable sneakers and go out for my walk. I always take different paths. Sometimes I pass through Memorial Park where I watch children playing, their laughter healing something old inside me. Other times I go to the natural viewpoint on the hill from where you can see the entire town, and in the distance the immensity of the countryside, or I just wander through the residential streets, admiring the gardens, waving to acquaintances, feeling part of this community that welcomed me when I had nothing. Eleanor and Claude are no longer with us. He departed 12 years ago, victim of a fulminant cancer. She followed him 3 years later peacefully in her sleep. I miss them every day, but I see their legacy alive in hope in the grandchildren and in the woman I became thanks to them. As for my past in Maine, it's like an old book I keep closed on the highest shelf. I don't open it often, but I know it's there. With time, I learned that forgiveness, not to others, but to myself, was the only path to peace. I forgave myself for being a victim. I forgave myself for the initial silence. And yes, I forgave myself for taking a life, even knowing it was the only way out I saw at that moment of desperation. My diary from that time still exists, kept in an engraved wooden box that Claude made for me. I rarely reread it. Those pages contain too much pain. But I keep it as a testimony, not just of the horror I lived through, but of the strength I discovered in myself. The church bell still rings every day in Millfield, just as it rang in my hometown. The difference is that now when I hear it, I no longer feel that tightness in my chest, that visceral fear. Sometimes I even stop my walk to listen to it, letting the sound dissolve in the afternoon air. It's a reminder that I survived, that the past no longer has power over me. This is my life today. Simple, peaceful, built brick by brick over ruins that I once thought would define me forever. I've lived in the same town for over 50 years. And yet, each daily walk is a small celebration of the freedom I won at such a high price. When people ask me the secret of my serenity, I just smile. How to explain that I found peace precisely because I knew its opposite in the most brutal form? How to say that each dawn is a miracle for someone who has faced the deepest darkness? I prefer to just keep walking one step after another under the open sky of Millfield, the place that taught me that even after the most devastating storm, it's still possible to find the way back home. My dear viewers, when I think of that night in the parsonage with the scalpel in my hand and the blood flowing, I still feel a chill. I'm not proud of having taken a life, but I know that was the only path I found to save mine, and that of my child I was carrying. Sometimes we find ourselves in such brutal situations that only extreme measures can free us. The weight of the scalpel in my hand, the look of surprise on his face when he realized I was no longer his submissive victim. These images have never left me, but they no longer destroy me either. I discovered that even the most desperate acts can be part of our journey to liberation. I spent years wondering if I could have done differently, if there was another way. But the truth is that when we are cornered, when our own father sells us as merchandise, when society closes its eyes and covers its ears, sometimes all we have left is our own strength to survive. That 15-year-old girl who faced the monster disguised as a saint never imagined she would reach 72, walking freely through the streets of Millfield with a daughter, grandchildren, and even a great-granddaughter. That she would find people like Eleanor and Claude who showed me that goodness exists, even after knowing the worst of humanity. The time in prison, the trial, the judgmental looks, it was all worth it for the right to breathe freely, to put down roots in a new land far from the horror of my past. To see my daughter Hope grow strong and determined to help other women, transforming our pain into purpose. If you're in a similar situation, remember sometimes salvation comes in the most unexpected forms. Mine came at the point of a scalpel and in the pages of a diary that told the truth no one wanted to hear. If this video touched your heart, hit the like button and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. It really helps this old grandma continue sharing her story, and leave in the comments the word prayer to remember that sometimes we need to be our own salvation, even when everyone is just praying for miracles that never come. Thank you for listening to me this far, for witnessing my story, for not judging that girl who did the unthinkable to survive. God bless each one of you. And may no child ever need to make the choices I had to make.